Hi, everybody. My name is Betsy Billhorn, and welcome back to Under the Forelock. Today, my guest is Veronique de la Porte. She has been an international dressage rider as a junior and youth competitor on the Dutch A squad, has had many top 3 placings in CDI, and was on the silver and bronze teams at the European Championships. And so she's been doing that for a while, then took a break, and is now an entrepreneur in the horse industry, has a equine hydrotherapy center, and started that in 2012, and also has a coaching offering for ambitious riders. So welcome, Veronique, to the Under the Forelock. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited for the discussion. So Veronique and I had a little pre-talk before this, and looking at your site, you know, we've talked a lot about the difference between, I would say, coaching and training. You want to talk a little bit about, you know, what you do from a coaching perspective versus saying being a trainer, which I think people get confused about. So,
right, yes, absolutely. So a trainer is the person that helps you when you're on your horse and helps you improve your riding as such. So it's really also a one-to-one relationship mostly, and so they're working on improving your riding skill set. A coach is working with you one-on-one, so not with your horse, and is improving your mindset. So it's around improving how you think, how you function. And so then by working on yourself, actually your riding does also improve indirectly. But so as a coach, I would never be the person to tell you, you should use your inside rein a little more, for example.
Right.
So it's more of an improvement of life skills, I'd like to say. And definitely the skill sets around everything that's involved in riding. So that could be improving your focus, that could be improving your time management, that could be all those types of things. But so it's not directly the actual riding itself.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a pretty good point, because some of the things that you mentioned, and I've also, you had the 10, the kind of the 10 myths about the high performance rider or the ambitious rider. And there were some very interesting things, because I think we focus so much on riding, right? And, what we're doing on the horse and competition versus how much of how we handle ourselves in our daily life, right? And our time management and how we eat and our emotions, right? And all these things that you really don't think about, but they have a really big impact on your performance actually in the saddle. Could you elaborate on some of those? Because I think some of them were very interesting. I think, you mentioned the blame game and some other, I think emotional spaces that people come from that I don't think that they realize how much impact their riding and what they want to do from a goal perspective.
Right. Yes, absolutely. So first of all, the one that actually isn't in that document, but that I think is really important, is we tend to think often that riding is a separate thing from the rest of our life. And that even if the rest of our life is in a shambles, it won't affect our riding, because that's a different thing. But that's not how it works, because it's impossible to really separate that out as much as sometimes we'd like to. If you're coming from work where it's been awful and you're completely stressed out, that will drain your energy, so that will affect how you're showing up when you're riding. If your riding is your work and you're struggling to deal with the owners of the horses you're riding, for example, that can be a huge influence on your performance. So it's basically just the aspect of everything that is involved in your life, and that will always come through into your riding. And where that kind of showed up for me the most was I had a horse that was really sensitive. He was very hot, and I'd figured out pretty quickly that if I was tired, I did not need to get on him, because my reactions were just too slow, and I would get frustrated and it would just not work. But I also came to notice that when I was distracted, all those types of things, that was the one horse that I did not need to ride. And sometimes you would think, oh, just do it for me today. Well, no, that's not how it works. And it's not really fair to expect that from your horse either. So it's really about showing up in a state that you're prepared and that you're showing up as the best version of yourself for your horse, and then allowing your horse to be the best version of themselves. Because when you're not showing up as 100%, then I don't think you can expect your horse to do that either.
Yeah, yeah, and I definitely can relate to that, because there's been days I've, you get to the barn, it's been a bad commute or whatever, you're so stressed out and you're just like, and then the next thing you know, you're just in this huge fight with your horse that you've actually precipitated, right? So one of the things that I found was really interesting is your first thing that you mentioned was having a goal, right? And we talk about ambitious riders, but I mean, what would you say a goal is, right? Because I think for some people, obviously it's hey, I want to compete or I want to go up the levels, but there can be other goals, and then you talk about a little bit, I think, the time management and your energy level. So let's say I have a very stressful job, right? But I want to go to the Olympics, right? So how as a writer do we kind of set those goals that they're meaningful, but also I'm not putting myself in a situation where then other bad energy things come in, like stress or frustration, right? Because I've set some goal that's ridiculous. How do you recommend doing that? So
Right. There's a lot in that question.
Yes. Yes.
How far I can get. First of all, so having a goal basically keeps you on the right path. So when you have a goal, you know where you're headed, you know what you want to achieve. And so that's kind of a way to avoid distraction and to make sure you keep focused on that one thing you want to achieve. But there are great goals and there are not so great goals. And that's one of the other mistakes I talk about, is if your goals are all performance goals, so things that you can pass or fail at, and things that you don't necessarily have a say in. If your goal is to win a competition, you don't have that under your control, and you could ride the best test of your life in dressage and just have a judge that didn't happen to like you that day, and you'll fail at your goal. So what I try to do with my clients is get them to set mastery goals coming from a mastery mindset. And so then your goal might be, I want to master my skill, first of all, so that there's not so much a pass and a fail in there. It's more about learning. And even if something goes wrong, you learn in the process. So it's all about either winning or learning. And so it's less of a pass fail thing in there. And especially the part is the control part. So if you set goals that are completely outside of your control, it makes it really easy to fail at them, and that is very demotivating. So it's really about knowing where you want to go, and generally that could be like moving up to the next level in whatever discipline of riding you're doing, and so that could be a good goal, but you wouldn't necessarily want to say, okay, I want to achieve this score, for example. So it's kind of a little bit of a redirect of the traditional goal setting and the traditional mindset around performance and achieving things. And the best part of it is when you get to a mastery mindset and you set mastery goals, your performance actually improves indirectly, because you're less focused on the things out of your control. You take the frustration, the demotivation out of it. And in the end, even though the better performance isn't your goal at that point, that's what ends up happening. So it kind of works both ways.
Yeah, interesting. And I think too, like when we talk about a mastery, right? So when you talk about, going up the level, which I think is a good example everybody could relate to, or it could be a goal like, hey, I don't, I want to be able to say, go on a trail ride, and I don't want to be frightened the entire time, or, hyperventilating, things like that. But the mastery bit, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there's also an element of it takes the time that it's going to take for you, right? And for the horse versus, I have to get these scores by the end of the year, or I've got to get this trophy or whatever. But do you see kind of that element of focusing on the mastery? You said the performance improves, but is there also an element of like the time actually changes or shifts, right? So everybody goes, oh, well, mastery takes a long time, but maybe not so much because you're not so focused on the outcome.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be mastery of writing in general, because I think
Mm-hmm.
that takes at least 2 lifetimes to
Yes.
achieve.
Yeah.
It could be mastery of the shoulder in a dressage test, or getting the distance right when you're going up to your jump in show jumping, that type of thing. So it can be much smaller parts of your riding, and focusing on one particular thing also helps to break that down and makes it really clear what you're working on. So instead of thinking, oh, I have to do a perfect dressage test, which entails not sure how many different elements at this point, you want to work on really getting the hang of the individual parts and then putting them together later. So it's breaking things down. It's making it kind of bite-sized steps. And again, if your goal is, I want to go to the Olympics, then every day you didn't go to the Olympics, you're failing.
Right.
So it's great to have a big hairy goal to get to in the end, but it's really important to have small bite-sized steps that are ambitious, so that drag you out of your comfort zone a little bit, but that are achievable, just to keep your motivation going. And again, then it also comes into what is your definition of success. And so if success is going to the Olympics, you're going to be failing every day you didn't do that. But if your definition of success is progress towards a meaningful goal, then every day that you're progressing and every day that you're working on it is a day that you've succeeded.
Yeah, and that, I think that's so, it's such a great mind shift, right? Because you're setting yourself up for success every day, right? And we have the little things that add up, right? And who knows, maybe you end up at the Olympics, maybe you don't, but you're not focusing on that. So one thing you talked about is coaching for the ambitious writer. So what is an ambitious writer for you? What does that mean?
Basically, the reason I chose the term ambitious is it's not necessarily a professional writer, so that doesn't have to be the case. I wanted to keep that quite broad, but I kind of wanted to avoid the person who thinks maybe they might be interested in doing something sometime, but aren't really that motivated to do it. So what motivates me and motivates me in working with people is that ambition, that drive. So people that want to succeed, that are willing to put in the work, and that are willing to do it, because achieving those types, mastery or getting really far is not an easy journey. It's a long, hard journey, and people really have to be willing to put in the work to do that. So that's basically the biggest part of it for me, is working with people that are driven to do that and know that it's not all going to be easy and fun, but it's worth it in the end.
Yeah. And whatever that is, right? So you said it could be something like mastering the shoulder in, or, that sort of thing. So when you have writers come into your coaching program, I mean, what are the top 3 most common things that you see that you're constantly having to coach people through, that they kind of come in with a preconceived notion or issue that they're working with?
It's a little bit different for every person, but obviously there are recurring themes. I think one of the biggest ones is the blame part that you mentioned earlier. So it's really easy to place the blame outside of ourselves, to look for excuses, to find reasons why things aren't going our way. And that could be that you can always find an excuse for everything. But by doing that, what we're doing is giving away our power and giving away our control of the situation. And by taking ownership, so saying, right, this is my fault somehow, then first of all, you're looking for solutions and you're creating ways for yourself to fix it. And that, I mean, there are things that are out of your control, for example, the weather, or what other people do, that can be out of your control, but then it's about preparing for those scenarios and saying, right, even if the weather goes bad, or if something else happens, this is how I'm going to handle it. This is what we're going to do. And in dealing with horses, that's especially the case, because a lot of the time we think, oh, I did great, but my horse was just not there today. And often or I honestly think that's just about never the case. Our horses try so hard for us. And so I really believe when we're showing up 100% that our horses are there for us. Now, there are, random things like if your horse gets a fright, for example, that's
right.
And something unpredictable that really can happen. But then it's about being able to not get distracted by that and to not ruin the rest of your ride based on that one thing, but being able to shift and forget that and ride like it didn't happen for the rest of the ride. And so that's the biggest one, is taking responsibility for how you're showing up and for how things are going, and not constantly blaming it on everything else and giving away all of your control. And again, there are external factors, but then it's about dealing with those and solving the problems. So I think that's a really huge one.
Yeah, and I think even in the case of the spook that you're talking about, right? And I've heard people that, the horse spooks or, crow hops or does something, and it's like, well, there was something in the arena, damn it, why did they put the manure rake in the corner, right? So there's always something, or, this horse, why is it so spooky? And I think you could even step way back and take extreme ownership of that and say, well, am I in a place that I'm making my horse feel safe, right? Or looking to me and saying, oh, is that manure rake okay? No, we're good, let's go, right? But yeah, you see that all the time. But how would you coach somebody through, I think there are situations, you talked about that are out of your control, like the weather, but let's say you have somebody who can't afford a certain type of horse, right? So maybe I want to do a working equitation and I want to go to, big competition. And, the fact is I've got my horse that's really not there for that, right? For whatever reason. And I think sometimes you can get into, I wouldn't call it a blame, but you can get into that mental trap of I can't because, right? Which I think is a very low grade blame, but like, how would you work with a client in I know those, I say more nuanced situation where it's not exactly blame. It is in my control, but not really. So how does that work?
Right. So that's an external factor that, like you say, you really don't necessarily have control of. And it comes down to mindset a lot, because as you said, when you feel like, oh, my horse isn't good enough, that's detracting from your energy and that's detracting from your performance right there. And in just about any sport, and that goes for the rider as well, the most talented horse is not always the one that wins. The most talented rider is not always the one that wins. So if you have a less talented horse, but you do all your exercises perfectly, so it might not have that last little bit of flair, you might not get the highest score ever, but if you execute them really, really well to the best of your ability, you're going to end up in the top of that class. So a lot of it ties back into your mindset around it and your feelings around it, and not getting stuck in that, oh, well, I'm not good enough, or my horse isn't good enough. And there are situations where that really is the case. So where, if you really want to perform at a high level, but then there are solutions to be found. So maybe you can't afford that really expensive horse, but you could find a sponsor that could. Or you could set up a crowdfunding action, for example. People come up with the craziest things. So when you get out of the focusing on the problem and you start looking at solutions, what happens when we're in the lower energy levels, so when is that kind of works as blinders, is you see what you think the problem is, you see things in a very black and white manner, and you kind of lose sight of all the other possibilities. And so then when you open up your view and start approaching it from let's fix this perspective, or from a win-win perspective, all of a sudden there are a whole bunch of other possibilities that you would never even have thought of before. And so then you can find ways around just about anything. And so it's really about how you're approaching it, and what you're looking at. And when you're focused on one single thing and won't look at anything else, you can get very stuck. But then it's really important to change your perspective and to look at it from a different viewpoint, and that can completely change everything. And actually, one of the ways I often explain this to people in the beginning with coaching, and I mentioned energy levels a minute ago, and so one of the core parts of how I coach is based on the IPEC philosophy of the 7 levels of energy, which means, first of all, there's a difference between anabolic energy and catabolic energy. So anabolic energy is everything that makes you feel open, uplifted, joyful, focused, so anything that's opening and inspiring, basically. And catabolic energy is the opposite, so everything that makes you contract, anger, stress, all those types of things. And one is not necessarily better than the other. We're very quick to think that, oh, anabolic energy is great and catabolic energy is terrible. And that's not necessarily the case, because the stress or the anger can be very motivating. Those are things that can help us in certain situations. But when you get stuck in that catabolic energy, that's when it can be detrimental, because it literally eats away at you, it eats away at your energy, it eats away at your cells physically. And so the lowest levels of energy are entirely catabolic, and then as you go up through all the levels, they become more and more anabolic. And I have like a basic scenario, and then I explain how the writer would react to the scenario from each level of energy. Would you like me to go through that quickly?
Yeah, actually, I mean, because I think the example that we talked about, let's say that I wanted to, go to international competition someday in working equitation, and, I have my, I'm riding a quarter horse, and I know I need to get this fancy Lusitano stallion. And, and I think you made a good point though, when you talked about the limitation, right? Because, and always finding a solution, because I think you focus on the joy of, hey, let's just do as well as I'm going to do with, old Dobbin here, right? My quarter horse. But somebody can see you, right? It opens up those possibilities, because just by participating, right, you're putting yourself out there. And I think, but yeah, I would love to take that example through the levels of the energy, and looking for those solutions. That would be awesome.
Okay. So the lowest level is level 1, and then the highest level is level 7. And level 1 energy is completely catabolic and is basically the victim mode. So that's where you place blame on everyone else, where you're basically apathetic. And so how you would react to that situation from level 1 is by saying, oh, it's just hopeless. There's no point in me even trying to compete, because my horse isn't good enough. No matter what I do, I'm never going to make it. Everyone else has had more opportunities than I have. It's just, it's not fair. I can't help it. I give up. Right? So, you're not even going to go out there. It's really low level. And again, this can be helpful because it can protect you in certain cases. And it's really good when you're feeling that way to gather data. So to figure out what brought me here. Why is it that I'm feeling this way? Have I been missing out on a bunch of sleep? Have I not been eating well? Is someone else in my life triggering this reaction? So when you realize that, it's basically creating awareness around, okay, this is just an energy level. It's not the end of the world. I'm just here in this moment, and that's okay. And just taking the time to figure out what brought you there. And then level 2, so moving up 1, is where anger comes in. So that's anger, frustration, more those types of emotions. But in level 2, you are being pushed into action. So that's where you would, you'd say, well, it's not fair that the judges give the Lusitano stallion more points. That's just completely unjustified, but I'm going to go out there and show them that I'm better than everyone else. So that's really a win-lose energy as well, where you're out for the win and everyone else has to lose for you to win, basically. But again, it's slightly better than 1 because you are taking action and you're doing things. And then level 3 is where you start rationalizing. So that becomes slightly more anabolic. And at level 3, you're going to go, well, I'm going to go to the competition and, I have a quarter horse. And so that's probably why I won't win. but I really am going to go out and I'm going to do my best. And if it doesn't work out, oh, well, that's the way it is. So that's where you'll rationalize everything that comes along, where you'll put in an effort. And if it doesn't work out, oh, well, but it's still kind of out of your control. And then we have level 4, which is becoming more anabolic, and that's really a helping energy. So level 4 energy is a lot in like nurses, for example, teachers, coaches, trainers, where you would say, okay, well, I have a quarter horse, and I'm going to do the best I can, but it's more important to me that I help my friend who's riding and that she does really well. So then you focus less on your own performance and more on how other people are doing. And, if you see someone else struggling, you'll go and help them, even if you're supposed to be preparing your own horse at that point. And then level 5 is where you create win-win situations. So there you would say, okay, well, I have a quarter horse, so it might not be the perfect horse, but let's see how I can get the absolute best out of this so that I do as well as I can. I show off my horse the best I can. And I really just want to make it a win for everyone. So then you're approaching it from seeking the opportunity in what you have, right? So you really want to take your quarter horse and train them the best you can and do the absolute best you can.
Right.
Then you have level 6, which is absolute joy. So that's basically where you say, right, I have a quarter horse. I love my quarter horse to bits. He's the best thing in the world to me. And I'm going to go out and just do it for the joy of riding and for the joy of what I'm doing. And I don't really care if I win or not, but I'm in it for the best possible experience. And then we have level 7, and at level 7, it's kind of a meditative state where you can't really function in the world. So then my horse, there is no competition, no matter what happens, everything is wonderful and you feel connected to the universe. And so that's not the mindset where you'd really be competing. But so you see, and in all of these energy levels, your skill set is the same, your horse is the same. So basically the basic principles are exactly the same, but just the way you approach it changes the outcome that you get and the experience you have completely. And it just takes quite small shifts to be able to achieve that, which is really awesome.
Yeah, because I mean the things that you were talking about, I mean, they were very defined as you go through the levels, but it's so little, right? It's just such a tiny thing to go from those. Yeah. And
now I kind of make it sound like, you're level 1 or you're level 2, and that's not actually the case. Everyone has access to all 7 levels, and you're always kind of a combination of all of these levels. So it's more that level 1 is predominant or level 2 is predominant, etc. So you kind of shift between them throughout the day. You go up and down. So you're never only a level 4 or only a level 2, for example.
Yeah. Well, because I could see even somebody getting caught in the trap of using the levels as a performance-based thing. Well, damn it, I'm going to get to level 2, right? I'm going to get to level 1. So when you have folks coming in for coaching, like, do you find that generally energetically that most people are down in the catabolic states, or is it just really a wide range, or is there anything different with riders? I don't know if you coach people who are non-riders, but do you see a difference there as well?
Right. I've coached a couple people that were non-riders, but that's definitely less than the riders. And I wouldn't say there's a difference between riders and non-riders in that sense. And most people that come for coaching are not down in those really catabolic levels, because when you're down there, you don't really see a solution, and you wouldn't be working on improving yourself. You're still stuck in blaming everyone else and being mad at the world. But what I do see mainly is that we have an assessment that we can do that measures your energy levels, and it measures how you're showing up just under normal circumstances and your stress reaction. And what's awesome about that assessment is it's an attitudinal assessment. So it's not a personality assessment that puts you in a box and says, right, forevermore, this is how you are, and there's nothing you can change. This measures how you're showing up now. And if you put in the work, so it won't change by tomorrow, but if you do the assessment again 6 months down the line, then you'll see shifts. And what you really do see often is people in the stress reaction, you see very high levels of 1 and 2 energy, which makes sense because when you're stressed, that's generally where you'll go. You'll go to either the victim mode or the lashing out angry mode. But that's not necessarily the most helpful thing, especially if you're a competitor, because a competition is often a stressful environment. So being able to manage that stress reaction better will improve your performance by leaps and bounds. And so a level 7, everyone has some level 7, but I've never had anyone that's predominantly, in that area. It's often 3s and 4s are generally the highest. And that, it depends a bit from person to person. But we really do see that when people become aware of that, it makes just that awareness makes such a difference and allows for incredibly quick shifts, which is really fun.
Yeah, well, I could see a level 7 person saying, well, why would I even go to coaching? That would be useless. It's a waste of my money. So, yeah. So you talked about stress responses and doing this assessment. And so I guess, people have different ways that they respond to stress, right? And, some of us hold our breath, other people get angry, other people just kind of collapse, right? And they, just turn into a puddle. And so by doing that assessment, then you have a pretty good idea of, what that person's kind of stress response style, so to speak, is. And how do you work with your clients or work with somebody? So, and again, are there themes as far as like that you see in your clientele? These are the common stress patterns or stress responses that people do, and what you would recommend to kind of break up that log jam.
Right. Their actual reaction is very different. So, some people, when they go into a competition arena, will freeze and kind of go through the motions of everything they have to do, but completely forget their actual training, and so not be able to shine and show, everything they've been working on. Other people go into extreme focus when they're stressed. So they will, perform 100 times better under stress than they ever would do at home. And then everything in between that. So it's really very different. But most of it, or the biggest part, is creating awareness around that. So is getting people to see what's happening in that moment and becoming aware that they can change it. Because often we don't realize we can change these things. We don't realize that, once you become aware of it and once you put the work in, you can completely change how you're showing up. And the same goes for emotions. That's people think, oh, well, I'm sad. I can't do anything about that. And that's not to say you should never feel sad at all, because there's incredible value in that, but you can choose how you want to feel, and find ways to trigger that emotion. And so the same goes for what you want to, how you want to show up when you are stressed, and creating the optimal, can't find my word, creating the best, getting everything right, on your way to the show, so that you don't go into that stress response. So it's looking at who do I need around me, or who do I need not to be there, for example. It's looking at how much sleep do I need the day before I need to perform. It's looking at do I have a lucky pair of socks, and making sure you have your lucky pair of socks. So it's a lot of it is creating what we call your I'm finding my words in Dutch, but I'm forgetting them in English. But just making sure that you have a success formula. That was it. So you create a success formula, so you know what it is that you need to set yourself up for success, and also so that you know what to do if one of those things isn't in line, or if one of those things doesn't work out, and dealing with what you do in that moment. And I think the number one part of it is creating awareness. And then from there, it's so much easier to shift into different things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that you mentioned too, that I think we should touch on, because I definitely raised an eyebrow when I read the document, but it was so true, was the people that you have around you, right? Because they either bring you up or they bring you down, right? And you had mentioned, I think the term that we use here is the dream team, right?
Right.
Who's your dream team around you, and it's I think people think, okay, that's my trainer, it's my farrier, it's my vet, it's my groom, or whatever, whoever's helping you. But I think the other thing that you mentioned, that would be interesting to elaborate on is that there are other people in your life that can really affect that outcome, that may or may not be at the barn, they may or may not be at your show, but they really can have an impact on your energy level and kind of your outlook. And do you need to talk a little bit more about that aspect of the other people in your life, not even necessarily horse related, that could have a huge impact on your energy?
Right. Yes, absolutely. First, I'll touch briefly on what you said about the farrier, the vet, and all those kinds of things. And one of the things that I've really noticed is how big of a lack of knowledge there is around those types of things. So even riders that are extreme high performers, so that do international level competitions, even Olympic level, will have a terrible farrier and will have no idea. So
Wow.
that really is a big thing, and you don't have to know everything yourself, but you have to know who to ask, and you have to know what questions to ask to get that right. So that's really important. But then also, like, as your actual question was, the people outside and in other areas of your life. And that can be, for example, one of your oldest friends that you've known forever and ever, but that is super negative and always drags you down, or is always complaining, and they only call you to complain and vent. And you might think, oh, well, she's my oldest friend, so be it. But people like that can really drain you completely. And if they happen to call you when you're on your way to the show, there goes your focus, there goes your concentration. It could be a family member that wants to come and watch you at the show, or even that is watching your kids while you go and ride that you're not actually super comfortable with. All those types of things. And it can be very difficult because if someone is your oldest friend, if someone is a family member, it's really hard to then say, okay, this is not serving me. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to ban that person from your life completely and never speak to them again. But it does mean you can set very clear boundaries around when you are in contact with them, or when you do not need to speak to them leading up to an event, or setting times when you do speak to them so you can make sure that works for you, and you can recharge afterwards. Because it's not always possible to get rid of those people in our lives. And sometimes it is possible, and sometimes that's the best thing to do. So that also is very different from situation to situation. But it does take, again, awareness and looking at it, and really objectively looking at it and saying, okay, what is the influence of this person on me? Because often we don't actually even realize that. So it's after you've spoken to someone and you realize you're feeling down and drained, you don't always necessarily link it to that person. So it's when we're feeling that we're not at our best, is really looking at, okay, what caused this? Why is it that I'm not showing up how I want to show up? And what can I do about it?
Yeah, and I think that's so true in a lot of different things, right? So, even preparing for this episode, right? I have certain things, and it stresses me out if people are going to start coming in this room 5 minutes before we're going to go on, right? So, I've had to go to a half hour back and things like that. So I can definitely see that. And, it reminds me, you watch interviews with professional athletes, and what do they do before, a big event? They go to the hotel and they're isolated so that they're not having those outside distractions. I don't think it needs to be as extreme as that, but I think having that checklist, right, of knowing that. I do want to go back to a point. I was really surprised to hear that, but I guess it's probably true. We have a very high performance, very elite type of rider, right, and doesn't, has a bad farrier or has a bad vet. Like, what happens there, do you think, because they're so so tracked into this one thing, right, and everybody else takes care of everything else? I mean, do you think, like, as we're moving up in our ambition, so to speak, right, and we are getting to those certain kinds of levels, it still behooves you as a horse person to really understand or have a working knowledge of everything so that you're not getting into those situations? Do you have a point of view on that?
Absolutely. I think, again, I don't think it's possible to know everything and to be able to figure everything out yourself. And I don't think you should want to do that, because if you want to do that, that'll take away from your riding performance.
Absolutely.
But it is important to then find the people who can either support you in that and create a team around yourself to take care of that. So if you find a fantastic stable manager who will take care of that for you, then you're done. But it is about, and I think we're becoming more and more aware of what a difference these things make. 20 years ago, no one even considered whether their saddle fit well or, how good their farrier was. That just wasn't a thing. And now as the sport progresses and as people get better and better, it is those small things that can make a huge difference. So I think it's something that's definitely coming up more and more, that we're just realizing that can make such a difference. Feed is another thing for horses. Definitely in the Netherlands, where we see people, it's like emotional feeding. We like to feed our horses a big scoop of food.
Yes.
But is that good for your horse? Often no. And have we looked at what's in the food that we're feeding our horses? Often also not. So there's so much that comes into it, which can be overwhelming and can seem, it can really just make you kind of think, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. And then it's just prioritizing, right? What's the most important thing? What will make the biggest difference for me and my horse right now? And kind of building up, from that point. And if someone comes up to you and says, wow, your horse's feet look terrible, it's investigating that. So it's not saying, oh, you must be right, I'm going to fire my farrier. But it's taking an objective, maybe taking a step back and looking at it and saying, okay, why did that person say that? Are they right? Maybe they had a completely different agenda. Maybe they're a farrier and they want to do your horse. So, there could be 1,000 reasons someone says that to you. But it's not, don't just wave it away and think, oh, they're absolutely wrong. I think that's so important, is always to keep an open mind and not think we have all the answers. And that's super important in coaching too, because when I got into coaching, I thought, oh, I've gained all this knowledge, I can tell people exactly what to do. And on my first day of coach training, the first thing they said was, a coach never tells their clients what to do. So I kind of thought, oh, right.
Yeah.
That's definitely what showed up for me, is working with clients. I may have thought, oh, well, they should do this or this, and have managed not to say that, and they choose a completely different route and it works fantastically for them. And then, it shows me, like, right, see, what I thought may have worked for me and may have been the best solution for me, but that doesn't mean it's the best solution for someone else. So it's definitely, if you want to be a high performer, you have to keep an open mind and keep learning, and don't think, you never have to think you've got it all sorted out, because there's always new things and different things. So yeah, it's a bit of a struggle, but it can be worth putting that effort in and learning what you need to learn and finding the people that support you in doing that.
Yeah, and I think there's an element, you're absolutely right, because you end up being a jack of all trades, a master of none. It's kind of the phrase that we use, to, if you're trying to learn everything, right? But yeah. I think there's an aspect of, though, taking responsibility or listening to your intuition, right? So if you kind of feeling like your horse is off and maybe it's the saddle, you should investigate that, right? Or, my horse's feet are always seeming to have a problem, right? Maybe I'm having a hot nail every single time. Maybe I should investigate that. So I think it's also that piece of, going back to what we were talking about energetically, is taking responsibility and taking a step back. I don't necessarily have to be the expert. They do need to investigate something that maybe energetically, intuitively, I'm not feeling very good about, right? And maybe there's an explanation, maybe there's not. So but not throwing it away, right? Because I think it's easy, especially when you're focusing on the performance, right, to say, well, okay, they're the farrier, they know. I can't, I can't fill my head with that, right? So.
Absolutely. But again, there is a kind of a fine line there, because it's also easy to then say, right, my ride didn't go well today. Oh, I must have to change my bit, or, oh, I must have to, find out what it could be. And so it's sometimes really difficult to find the balance between yourself. So, where it could be something that you're doing and where it could be an external factor that's playing into it. And so that's where a lot of self-awareness comes in. And, just really looking into that and, coming back to the horse I mentioned earlier that was so sensitive and difficult to ride. I would, at some point I was training at home and I could not get him to flex to the right. So all I wanted to do was ride a decent 10-meter circle, and this horse was at Prix Saint-Georges level. So that should have been doable.
It should have been okay, yeah.
And I couldn't get him to do it. The only time I could get him to bend to the right was in a half pass. That was perfect, but I couldn't do it in any other exercise. So this was about a week that I couldn't figure this out. I went to my trainer and I said, I can't figure this out. And I'm sure it's not me. I'm sure it's something that he's doing. So she said, okay, well, ride. And so I started riding, and first she said, okay, try a little bit more inside rein or a little bit more outside rein, and it still wasn't right, which I was really glad about, because often I would go to my trainer and everything would be perfect. And so then she said, you know what, just look between his ears. And so when I started doing my circle, I would look down my line. But because I was looking too far down my line, I was slightly changing my posture, which was putting him off and was ruining my bend. So she said, just look between his ears. And I did that, and my circles were perfect. So it was such a small little thing, and it was me. It wasn't my horse. Yeah. I just said, oh, again, every single time. I think now it must be my horse, and every single time it was me.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a trainer, and he would say, it's never the horse's fault, right? You always have to step back and always look at what you're doing, and that's so subtle, right? What happened with you, it wasn't this gross kind of obvious thing. That is awesome. That is really awesome. So one of the things that I think people may not be aware of is you also do breath work, right?
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about where the breath work, we've talked about stress response and energy levels and and all of this. So where does the breath work come in for you, and how do you weave that in with your coaching practice?
Right. I think I'll start answering that question by what drew me to breath work. And that was a seminar I went to, and there were people giving breathwork sessions there. And I did the first one, and it was short. It was only about half an hour. I was jet lagged. I fell asleep. It did nothing for me. And so then the next day there was going to be like an hour and a half session. So I went up to the guy that was facilitating it, and I said, is there any points? Because I'd heard all these wonderful things about breath work, right? So I went up to this guy and I said, is there any point in me trying this? Because the one yesterday didn't do anything for me. And he kind of looked at me and he said, are you in your head a lot? I said, yeah. And he said, then you have to do the session. And I went and I did the session, and it literally blew my mind. It was the most intense experience I've ever had, of energy flowing through my body, of just this reconnect, I would say, between my mind and my body. So I was just like, okay, wow. I need to learn this. I need to learn how to do this. And so that's what brought me into it. And especially, I think a lot of high performers are very much in their heads. You know, you want to figure everything out, you want to do everything logically. And using your breath is a great way to make the connect between your mind and your body, and to get kind of back into your senses, get back into your feeling. And so that's one of the best parts of it for me. And it's so easy to use at any point. You know, you don't need an expensive anything. You don't need to bring something with you that you can forget. You always have your breath. And in situations where you're stressed, it's the best tool you can use to change your state, because we automatically breathe differently depending on our state. So if you think about how you breathe when you're super zen and relaxed, or how you breathe when you're furious with someone, that's, you know, a really different experience. And that also means that we can use it the other way around. So if we change our breathing, we can change our state. And that's what I find fascinating. So you can actually fool your nervous system into thinking that you're relaxed, even if you are super stressed. And so being able to teach my clients to do that before they get on a horse, for example, is amazing, because it really helps them to calm their nervous system. So by doing slow, deep breathing, you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which gets you out of the fight or flight mode. It gets the blood flowing back to your digestive system. It gets everything working better. And then you can focus and do what it is that you want to do. And that allows you to rest and recover as well, because often with high performers, they get stuck in that fight or flight response. They get stuck in that kind of stressed feeling, and there's no recovery. So you really have to learn to use what we call small recovery loops. And that could be as simple as taking a big sigh a couple times a day. And then, you know, bigger things less frequently. But it's so important to take that time and not always be going, because otherwise at some point you can't go anymore.
Yeah, and the breath work is great. I do a little bit. I've just been starting to learn that for myself. And the thing that I like about it is you could do it in the car. You can do it in the 2 minutes that you're in the tack room. You can do it, you know, when you have a break, and you can practice it anywhere, right? And you know, the other bit of it, I started with box breathing a few years ago, right? Because I have a very hot tempered and sensitive horse as well, and so we ride outside quite a bit, you know, and there was times where I could feel her breathing funny, and I would do the box breathing. But it's gotten to the point for me now that it's almost second nature. Like, I don't even realize that I'm doing it when I'm feeling that energy off of her, that she might be a little concerned about a situation, or more than concerned about it. And so is there a set of specific techniques that you teach people? You mentioned the big sigh. Are there like specific techniques that, say, listeners of this show could just do right after the show, or is it unique to each individual, or how does that work with folks?
It depends a little bit from person to person, what works for you and what you enjoy. There are some basics. First of all, using your breath is a great way to get centered. So to get yourself present and in the moment, because often also when we have to perform, we might be worried about who's watching. We might be thinking about what the judge, if the judge likes the color shirt you're wearing today. We might be thinking about a million different things. And so before your ride, if you can just take a minute or two and breathe, and then it doesn't have to be any technique. It just has to be taking that time to focus on your breath, to bring yourself into the present moment, and to try and let go of everything else that's going on. So that's really simple and can already make a big difference. And then if people are dealing with stress, it's often the box breathing is a great one, as you implied, just to kind of create some balance and regain a sense of control. And sometimes people are kind of the opposite, that they want to get a bit fired up, that they need a bit of an extra energy boost. And then what we would do is more of a circular breath, so a quick inhale, exhale with no pauses in between. or you have like a 2 sharp inhales through your nose and then an exhale. So it would be a that's a really good technique to get focused and to energize yourself. So it kind of depends on exactly what it is you need, and then also what people find works for them. So it's a bit of an experiential thing, is, you know, figuring out what works for you. But I would, yeah, just that couple minutes of focusing on your breath can be huge in getting yourself present, in getting yourself prepared for what it is you want to do. And you can even do that while you're on your horse and walking, you know, before you get started. Just walking on a long rein is taking that time to center yourself and to set an intention for your ride. So it doesn't have to be a half hour of meditative breathing.
Right, because we need a half hour meditative breathing, a half hour meditation, a half hour of yoga, right? I mean, it's like, where do you have time to do all these things? And
Exactly.
and that's what I, you know, and it was funny because the person who was teaching me the breath work, you know, he taught me you know, and I have to admit, I was really skeptical. I'm like, come on, this is stupid. Like, that's not going to work. And I did it, and it works. And now I do it all the time, and it's a really handy tool.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I notice when I do it is, you know, especially if I'm with my horse, right? You know, if she's right, and I'm like, oh, it's okay. You know, you actually watch the horse go, oh, right, and it breaks whatever little energy thing going on, little TV show in their head, and you know, and I can watch her visibly start breathing differently too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, have you had that experience with your horses, or have your clients had those experiences? Because I just know anecdotally for me, I watch her kind of harmonize to whatever breathing pattern I have as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it, again, comes down to how you change your state in that moment. So it might not be that she is matching your breath, but she just feels your relaxation by doing that. And, you know, then follows your energy, which is amazing. And that's exactly what you want. And what I find for myself in my riding is, if I'm starting to get a little bit frustrated, you know, if I'm trying something and it doesn't work, I go into short breathing. I go into kind of more of a tightness. And if I become aware of that and slow down my breathing, and just relax on my exhales, it basically fixes the problem more often than not, because you get out of that circle that you're in. You get out of that focus on what's bad, and you just let go. And then things start flowing again instead of being blocked up. And once, what I often do kind of in my warm-up when I'm riding is, on my inhale, I'll collect my horse a little bit, and then on my exhale, I'll ride forwards a little bit. And so those are really small motions. But you really get in tune with your horse. You get in tune with your breathing. And it just allows you to be incredibly present and to focus entirely on your horse and on what you're doing. So those are things that I find really helpful, and that I've shared with a bunch of my clients that really enjoy doing that. And also just making sure before your ride that you're breathing full breaths, so that you're not in the shallow stress of breathing up in your chest, that you're using your lung capacity, that you're using that. And just, you know, before you're actually starting to work your horse, is making sure you're taking full breaths, you're doing that, can also make a huge difference. And like you said, it's hard to believe that something as simple as the breath can make any difference at all, and yet it really, really does.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And one of my big problems has always been that, you know, I always, Betsy, breathe. Like, well, I'll hold my breath, right? I think that's my stress. Like, I don't get short of breath. I literally will just stop breathing and hold my breath. And then, you know, at that point, you know, your head's in a different direction and everything else. So yeah, it's funny how quickly too it creeps up on you, because I have to constantly check in with myself. Am I actually breathing? Or am I saying to myself that I'm breathing when I'm really not, and I've had one trainer, he was like, Betsy, you have to breathe. I'm like, I'm breathing, right? And he's like, no, take a deep breath. And, and it actually, right, it lifts your body and does such great things. So if people were more interested in, breath work, I mean, is that something that you do, or is that just part of the coaching, or how does that work in your practice?
Right. At the moment, it's just part of my coaching. So I haven't been doing any sessions only focused on breath work. It's more kind of in the package of the entirety of things. I have been considering focusing some more on the breath work, but I haven't started doing that exclusively yet. And I also find that it ties in really well with a number of other things. So if you're only doing the breath work, it could, you could do a session around that, which would be really helpful. But I find that you get a lot more out of it if you tie it into the rest of the coaching package, so it's called, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think that when you talk about, again, like the ambitious writer, right, it's not just, I don't think there's like the magic vitamin, right? It's breath work, or it's, making sure you have your success list, right? It's a combination of all of those things to really kind of make that conditions, right, to be able to move forward and have mastery. So
yeah. Absolutely. Some people will show up and they know exactly what their success list is. They know exactly what they need. So they don't need to focus on that. What they need is something completely different. And so that, it also per client is very different where the focus is. So for some people, the focus might really be on the breath work. But for others, it might be something completely different. And so that's very much also determined by the client themselves. So I don't say, right, we're going to do this first and then that and then that. It's a discussion and it's a partnership. So it's not about me telling you what to do and saying this is exactly what's going on. It really is a partnership where you guide your client to the best possible result for them. But not being the authority saying, right, this is how it's going to be.
Yeah. And you mentioned a partnership, and one thing I'm curious about, so, you talked about the dream team and you're doing the coaching, and how do you and your client say, the client is working with a trainer, and maybe the trainer has a very specified ways of doing things, right? Or, how do you work with your client to integrate your coaching with their trainer and their writing and some of the other people that might be in their life around that, that goal or that mastery that they're trying to do?
Right. So generally, I wouldn't work directly with any of those other people because hopefully that's not necessary.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And generally, what I do supplements everything they do. So hopefully, if all goes according to plan, there's no competition there, first of all, because what I do is something completely different to what they're doing. And there also shouldn't be any clashes in what we're saying. And if there are, that's something to look at. Possibly for me, possibly for the other person. That depends a little bit. So I would say mostly all of that is it forms this great what's my word? Or what I do with the client should improve how they show up in all those other areas. So generally what I hope is that the trainer would say, oh, wow, what did you change? How come you're writing so much better?
Yes, and welcome it and say, and can I have this person's name so I can give all my other clients? Yeah. So, and the reason I bring that up, because I think sometimes, people say, oh, well, the trainer is my coach, right? Or my coach is my trainer. And we're really talking about something very different that's complementary and supplemental. And honestly, everything that you've talked about here, we could take horses out of this and say, my career or my relationships or, I'm playing hockey or whatever it is, right? Yeah. I mean, it's definitely benefit, not just for the writing. It's for, a holistic benefit, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I like to say is if you work on a horse, then that horse gets better. But if you work on yourself, then all your horses get better.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
so
that's so true.
it really is. And you notice the effects of that in everything in your life. So like you said, it doesn't just come down to the writing. You start noticing that other things start improving as well. And that really can just be because you made a tiny little shift in how you look at things. So sometimes small little changes can go a really, really long way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Veronique, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. And, hopefully look forward to some more in the future. I always ask the guest at the end, and I'm going to ask you this. So in your writing, what was kind of your aha moment that, something just bam came through and you just had this revelation? Can you recall one?
Yes, I can. I'm not sure what year it was. 2001, I would say, at the Dutch Championships for junior riders. I had done very well on the first day. I was in the top four, and up to that point, I had never really been in the leader positions, so that was amazing. And on the second day, I was riding my test and I was doing the walk part of my test. I had to do walk pirouettes. And all of a sudden, my horse reared up and spun around. But because I was so angry at that point at my horse for ruining my chances, that I completely ruined the rest of my test. I rode the rest of my test in anger, completely tense and thinking, oh, I'll show you I can do this. And so I did not do well at all. And when I came out of the arena, my trainer practically dragged me off of my horse and told me that if I ever did anything like that again, he would not train me any longer. And I also discovered that the reason my horse had jumped up was there was a girl sitting on the side of the arena and a bee came up to her. So she had jumped up and made a very sudden movement, which I hadn't even seen. So there was a very clear reason why my horse had reacted that way. So kind of the combination of those two things really, really made me realize, oh, okay, this was not my horse's fault. And my reaction to this destroyed my chances of doing well in the rest of that championship. So that was definitely an awakening moment, and one that taught me to practice patience. So I did not used to be a patient person, and that was something I really, really learned and have gained massive, massive benefits from since then.
Yeah, and that's such a great story, right? And it is so funny because it ties everything kind of what we were talking about, right? Where
Yes,
you're in this very catabolic state, you're really angry, right? And and then stepping way outside and saying, well, this had was this totally external thing, right? And you couldn't have accounted for a bee. So
exactly.
yeah. So that's wonderful. Thank you. So again, thank you so much for being on the show. And have a great rest of the day. And I want to thank all of our viewers. You can find Veronique's information in the show notes. We'll have links to her site so that you can get in touch with her for more information if you're interested in the coaching. And thank you. And this has been Under the Forelock.
Thank you so much.